I slid down the ladder, and even with my flashlight on and strapped to my arm, I couldn't see a whole lot down there. Each of the blinking lights had 3 letters and 3 numbers, so it definitely had a coded sequence, but it didn't match any code I knew. It wasn't hexadecimal, it wasn't any acronyms that I knew about. It was probably a shortened format for the server names. But if these lights were all server racks, then there were a lot of them. The ladder went down 30 meters and there were dozens of blinking lights every level. And if I was to take a guess, that it would be a server farm with 720 racks. This kind of computing power would be more than enough to explain what I saw on my console. But my thoughts of the Red Prince living down here vanished very quickly. Not only was there no evidence of anyone living there, with no clothes, no food wrappers, no water bottles, nor anything to sustain life, but the most important detail was the smell. My living area in the OSS smelled like someone was living there for a long time. Even with my best cleaning efforts, it still smelled like old sweat, unwashed skin, and other less desirable scents in the recycled air. The HVAC system of the OSS was designed to keep me alive, not comfortable. While I didn't understand all of the details, I did understand that the scrubbers used carbon dioxide that I exhaled, sunlight from the panels, and lithium hydroxide to produce breathable oxygen and drinkable water for me. Artificial photosynthesis to help keep life going, even in space. But the scrubbers did nothing about the bacteria in the air that produced stink. If anything, they made it worse because it just moved them all around. But the hidden section of the OSS didn't smell anything like the rest of the OSS. The air had a bit of a plastic tinge to it, but no musty smell nor metallic taste. So, for whatever reason, this part of the OSS had not only its own air supply, but it had nothing living in it. Not even bacteria, judging by the lack of dust and smell. Every square centimeter of space on the OSS had to serve some purpose of some kind. So why was this area of the OSS hidden from me? I hadn't made it to the bottom yet, and already my living space had quadrupled. And honestly, there was a bit of excitement in me as I descended deeper and deeper into the darkness. The bottom of the ladder led into a large circular room. The room had no lights as far as I could see in the flashlight's beam, but the wall had a series of windows. 12 of them, each of them peered out into space. But as I drifted closer to the windows, I saw that there were boxes strapped down just beneath the windows. The first box I approached was directly across from the ladder. It was a perfect cube, a meter to each side and covered in a dark cloth. The cloth was held down by little metallic clips. I unclipped it one at a time. I figured I would peek inside to see what it was. Something was going on here, and I had to figure something out to provide to the Red Prince. I lifted the corner of the dark fabric to peer at the cube underneath, my flashlight shining directly on it. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but what I saw was definitely not what I was thinking. What was underneath the cloth resembled an aquarium, but it was completely sealed, and as far as I could see, there was no fish inside. But I could see green algae colonies free floating inside the cube of water. But anywhere I directly shined my flashlight on, the algae started to wilt and turn brown. Whatever this odd algae was, it abhorred a light and started to die when exposed to it. I snapped my light off, trying to see if something would happen, and sure enough, it did. My flashlight off, the algae had a dim bioluminescent glow. I watched as the algae gradually grew to replace what was lost. Tiny polyps and branches of green glowing algae overtook the dead colonies, and they were soon twice as dense as they were before. Certainly a curiosity, but I was not sure what this algae had to tell me about what was happening on the OSS. So I fitted the cloth back where it was and clipped it again so it would stay in the darkness. I drifted over to another window, and this box was also a meter on each side, but it wasn't covered with anything. This case was also glass, but instead of being full of water, I guessed it must have been full of a preservative resin. In the center of the case was a single, very large feather. It was almost as long as my wrist and an almost metallic gold-silver mix. It was enchanting to glance at as I stared at the pins of gold and silver, which reminded me of a sunset filtering through the clouds. I stared at the feather for a long time before I finally tore my eyes away from it and drifted over to the third box. Now committed to seeing what was in these boxes, I peered into this glass box and saw that within it was an amorphous, oily mass that was as red as blood. I watched as it formed cones, stretched pseudopods before collapsing back into itself, forming a cube, then a sphere, before turning amorphous again. Something about the way it moved, it wasn't alive. I knew that deep in my heart, but something about the way it moved told me that it was both dangerous and animate in some way. That case, better keep it contained. The next box had a red painted square around the glass box, clearly made to show that it was not to be approached. What was inside the box was one of the most beautiful and most surreal objects I had ever seen in my life. The inside of the glass case had 8 chains of dark iron, one extending from each corner, as it was attached to the object in the center of the box, bracing it and keeping the object from moving. What object was in the center of the box, I don't know. It wasn't that didn't see it. I could see it. It wasn't that it wasn't something I didn't recognize. Every time I looked at it, I could feel the warmth of familiarity in my head, but it was like the object itself left a blank spot in my memory. Now the red box on the floor made a whole lot more sense. If I couldn't see the danger, then I would have to be warned about getting close. I did notice a dark small rectangle on the glass corner, and as I shined my light on it, I let out a gasp as I recognized the card stuck to the glass. The card had a crescent moon with 2 pillars below it, and 2 wolves howling near the pillars. But even if the art wasn't enough to confirm my suspicion, the word underneath the picture was in the common Creole of the 7 cities, and it told me the name of the object within the case. Number 18, The Moon. Red Prince was right. She wasn't here on the OSS. No one was. But there was an Arcana here. How it worked or how it was being used, I don't know. But maybe Red would be able to help. When my console was done updating in 3 days, all I could do was see if I could find more clues to send to her when the console was accessible again. I checked the other boxes, but they were all empty, with no marks and no signs about what was to be put in the boxes. No other information found. I traveled up the ladder to the main part of the OSS, where I closed the hatch behind me, leaving the hidden section of the OSS sealed away. For now. I reread the letter, hoping that there was something I missed, but there didn't seem to be anything missing in the letter. So instead, I inspected the paper and the pen that also came with the letter. The paper was blank and a bit of a smooth and durable feel to it, like calligraphy paper. The pen was a modified ballpoint pen designed to work in space. So it was bigger than a typical pen, and when you pressed the point to the paper, pressurized nitrogen forced ink out of the tip to allow the ink to mark the paper. But as I ran the pen over in my hand, I saw that there was something written on it in small words. "Write letter, seal envelope, letter delivered," was written on the pen. Nothing else left to try. I decided to follow the directions. I had followed weirder instructions, and since it appeared in the OSS, it may be able to communicate with the Red Prince. The hardest part of composing the letter was finding a flat space to write on. The hardest part of composing the letter was finding a flat space to write on. Nearly everything in the OSS was either curved or rounded over, so that there were no sharp edges for me to accidentally cut myself on. Even the glass of the window leading back to Earth was convex, and of course it was unsettling to write on the only thing separating my biosphere from the heliosphere. Eventually, I found myself writing using the flat screen of the console as a clipboard, while I wrote my letter to the Red Prince. Dear Red Prince, I am trying this even though I know logically it shouldn't work, but to sum up what happened, my liaison took down my computer for 72 hours, and with it my connection to Earth, since my radio doesn't work without my console. They said it was to allow an update, but somehow I feel like it's a bad idea to be without communication with the Earth for an extensive amount of time. I will have no forewarning of any threats, and something can happen to me, and I will not be able to inform anyone. I did find some clues. There's a lot of processing power here, and at least 720 servers working together on an unknown function. And down in the hidden section of the OSS, there were 12 glass boxes, and 4 of them contained something. One had algae that died near light, another had the largest gold and silver feather I had ever seen, and the third box had something that kept changing its shape, and it was some kind of red oil. The final box, I think, contains the Arcana. What is in the box, I'm not sure, but it was kept confined with dark iron chains, and there was a card on the box calling it The Moon. I'm not sure how the Arcana is being used, nor if it's safe to try and let it out, but what should I do, if anything? Signed, Samuel Stevens, Lastaname. After finishing the letter, I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope, and it sealed just by closing the envelope. Now the front of the envelope was addressed to the Red Prince of River City, with the return address of Samuel Lastaname of the OSS. Where do I leave this letter now? While I wondered where I was going to put the letter, I realized that the envelope disappeared from my hand. Whatever mysterious force or entity that brought the letter to me took the letter from me. But now the question remained. If this was my only form of communication with the Red Prince, when was I going to hear from her again? While I pondered these thoughts, I saw something move beyond the window. Curious, I approached the window and looked through it. My heart dropped when I saw that there was something beyond the OSS. Below the OSS, I saw a sleek, silvery ship that resembled a stingray in shape. It had no glass as far as I could see, and near the tail of the ship was a flag I didn't recognize. It had 5 vertical red stripes with 2 diagonal green stripes cutting across them. I remembered rule number 7. I couldn't access the rules without the console, but I was pretty sure that rule number 7 said I wasn't supposed to see any other satellites or shuttles during my mission. But if I did, then I would need to take pictures of what I saw. Taking the digital camera, I took a picture of the strange ship just before it dashed away, moving far faster than my eye could track. At first, I figured it simply disappeared. But then I heard a familiar knock on the airlock. Something was outside of the OSS and trying to get in. As my heart pounded, I tried to keep myself calm. You've dealt with this before. You just have to keep them from knowing that you are in here, I reminded myself, just as the airlock alarm started to blare. Whatever was outside the OSS just got inside the airlock and would be inside the OSS within moments. Now, filled with panic, I glanced around the OSS trying to figure out the best place to hide. I couldn't hide inside the other airlock and inside the shuttle. They would find me too quick. I could try to ride the shuttle back to Earth, but that wouldn't work either. Either their ship would catch me, or because of what the rules said, they said if I returned too soon, I may never leave. That only left me with one option: the hatch leading to the hidden section of the OSS. I had a hard time seeing it until I heard the Black Moon's howl, so there's a more than fair chance that whatever kept it hidden from me would also keep it hidden from them. I kicked myself over to the hatch and quickly opened it and slid inside before closing it behind me. Not even a minute after I closed the hatch, the inner airlock opened and the intruders walked into the OSS. When I saw them, I saw that they weren't even close to being human. The first being that entered the OSS was spider-like in the way that it walked with 8 limbs. Except each of the limbs were shaped like overextended human arms, with hands ending in 12 fingers as it pulled itself into the OSS. The main body was almost shaped like an elongated bean, with no eyes nor nostrils, but it did have a large mouth as it explored the OSS by touch, and its skin looked like it was smooth and warm. The intruder that followed had no legs, but it hovered. It had a metallic cowl and a vaguely human torso with 2 arms and 1 head, but I couldn't see any of its features except for 2 glowing red eyes. The hovering creature appeared to be in charge, as it hovered over to the console and tried getting it on, but after a few failed keyboard taps, it simply turned away, apparently frustrated, while the spider creature wandered and walked over the hatch I was hiding beneath. I could see the snarling mouth mere inches away from me as I held my breath, scared that this creature would find the hatch release and decide to attack me. But after a moment, it continued away, and the floating creature kept trying to access my console, while the crawling creature went through all my things. After half an hour of tense anxiety, the floating creature and the crawling one both headed over to the airlock from whence they came, and it closed behind them. I stayed below for another 10 minutes before I crawled out of the hidden tunnel. Whatever concealed the hatch worked on them too, but as far as I could see, they left whatever they were, and they left everything where it was supposed to be. Still though, whatever they were, I had a very bad feeling about them. Not much else happened for the rest of the day. I did some exercises for a few hours, but with my only connection to the outside now just being a singular window, I just needed something to do more than anything. And when it came time for sleep, I went to sleep surprisingly easily. I guess the anxiety and exercise wore me out enough that sleep came easily. While sleeping, I dreamt of the hidden section of the OSS. In my dream, in the hidden section, I saw a woman dressed in white robes and kneeling before an empty throne. There was silence in the darkness, but it felt like there was a lot said in the silence, while the woman continued to bow before the throne, before she tried to stand. But as she stood up, a purple shadow rose behind her. I tried to scream, but no sound came out as I watched the figure in purple force the woman down to the ground. The woman now prostrated herself before the throne, as the hooded figure in purple sat on the throne. Now on the throne, the figure was then holding a cane in one hand and an hourglass that flowed upwards in its other hand. And I watched as more and more people prostrated before the figure on purple on the formerly empty throne. I saw a man with long hair offer a crossbow before the figure, who didn't so much as glance at the man, as the purple figure stomped on his head, leaving the man broken and still on the ground. I saw a knight with a trident made of bone offer her weapon, only to have the figure take up the trident and stab it through her plate mail, leaving her pierced heart on the ground and her trident holding her body up from the ground. And then, the most heartbreaking of all, I saw a young woman with a jean jacket and a crown on her back stare up at the figure with utter hatred, refusing to bow or even stand on her knees. Even as her skin rotted away, leaving only her skeleton and her jacket, I could still see her stare up at the figure with hatred. Even when the figure struck at her skull with its cane, she still stood strong as ever and stared at it with a burning hatred that didn't dare fade. When I woke up, I didn't know how to interpret the dream. I usually didn't dream at all, let alone dream of something that was so visual. That day was pretty quiet. Nothing changed and nothing happened. I checked the readings that I could understand. I exercised, I ate, and I waited for either another letter to appear or my console to turn back on. You don't realize how much you depend on contact and stimulation until it is gone. Everything was dependent on my console. No music, no radio, no communication. The only thing that there was to do was look down on the planet or exercise. There was no work to do, no one to talk to, and nothing to listen to. After the end of the third day, with no message from anyone and my console still off, I began to get worried. I managed to convince myself I was off by just a few hours and would just need some extra time before I was back up and running again. When the seventh day began without my console, paranoia officially took over. There was still no message from Red and no letter, no matter where I checked on the OSS. Not too long ago, I thought the most terrifying thing that could happen to me was something breaking into the OSS. But after a week of complete silence, I realized the most terrifying thing was waiting for something to happen. When something happened, I had a clear problem to face. I just had to solve that problem. But now, there was nothing, just waiting for the stick to hit. I glanced at the airlock that led to the shuttle. I could try to ride the shuttle back, but the rules said that if I return too soon, I may never leave. But the mission was supposed to last 6 months. I don't think I can last an additional 5 months in complete isolation with no connection to anyone. I don't even know why I'm still trying to follow the rules, since they've already been broken by my liaison. The rules said that my liaison could be reached at any time, but they've been out of reach for a full week. There could be a disaster back on Earth, and I would have no way of knowing. I could die up here, and no one would know that I ever lived up here. That final thought made me shiver. If anything could happen to me, and no one would know, that had to be their plan. They must have known that I made it into the hidden section of the OSS, and now would rather have me die up here than have me survive with the knowledge of what was down there. If they would leave me to die up here, then I was going to ruin their plans. Taking my flashlight and a socket wrench down, I took the ladder down into the hidden section of the OSS. I made my decision. If what they kept imprisoned down there was capable of creating paths to other worlds, maybe it could create a path to Earth for me, if I let it out. In the hidden section, I shined a light into the box with the chains and the object I couldn't see. But I still had a feeling that what was in there could hear me and was listening to me. I can let you go, but when I let you go, you need to open a path for me so I can go back to Earth. Can you do that for me? I asked the thing in the box. It felt like the object inside nodded, or at least acknowledged what I said. So, now in too deep, I decided to let it go. The chains inside of the box had a socket on the outside that could be tightened or loosened with a socket wrench. It didn't take long to loosen the first socket, and after the chain slackened, the object inside of the box drifted more within the confines of the glass cube. It didn't take too much longer to loosen all of the chains, and when the last chain slackened, the object within the case vanished, and so did the card on the box, leaving it empty. I released the moon from its prison, and it didn't take me with it. As the realization began to dawn on me, I noticed that there was another letter from the Red Prince taped to the window. Grabbing the letter, I saw something else that was impossible beyond the window. Drifting near the OSS, there was a woman in a purple dress, drifting, her face facing away from the OSS, and wearing no EVA suit as far as I could see. I could see her dark skin peeking through her dress, and her hair floating around her head like a halo. But that wasn't the most unbelievable part. The most unbelievable part was the fact she had large feathered wings on her back that were the same shade of purple as her dress. And I could very clearly see that she was still moving and still breathing. I don't know what took over me, but I quickly climbed up to where my EVA hung and put it on and made sure that I had my oxygen on and Red's letter tucked away somewhere safe. But after I put on my helmet and I prepared to go out in the airlock, a twinge of fear filled me. I released the Arcana, it disappeared, and then suddenly both a letter appears and a complete stranger. This might be some kind of trick, but if it isn't a trick, then there is someone out there who's still alive. Maybe they could help me get back home, or maybe I could just have some company. But I definitely wasn't going to wait to read the letter before I headed out. Time was short. I faced the airlock leading out. I flipped a final switch and the oxygen fled the airlock. And then the outer door opened, revealing the darkness outside.